everybody. My name is Pimelo. Welcome to the rally hosted by the International Socialist Alternative, the ISA, and Rosa International Socialist Feminist. The ISA is present in over 30 countries. I am from the South African section called the Workers' and Socialist Party. Today we are here on this important day to remember all the feminist historic struggles that led to women's rights. And with the current state of the world, we are also here to remember that we are not yet free, and that no one is free until we are all free. International Women's Day is a tradition passed on by working class women in Russia when, on 8th March 1917, tens and thousands of women organized protests and rallies in the heart of the Russian capital, Petrograd. These women participated in the organization, agitation, and persuaded soldiers to join in the movement and prevent the war. In the next few days, demonstrations grew, eventually being joined in by students, shopkeepers, office workers, and spectators. Protest of March 8th, organized by working class women, started a revolution that overthrew the Tsar and prevented World War I. While China and the USA ignite fires over a petty squabble race for supremacy, working class people are bearing the weight of the Cold War, and Putin is waging a war on Ukraine. Today, we are going to be having speakers from 6 different countries. As an international, it is inevitable we'll have members from different language backgrounds. Comrades will be speaking in their languages, subtitles will be on screen. These comrades are involved in feminist struggles against women's oppression around the world, challenging capitalism in their homes and helping to raise working class consciousness towards overthrowing this decaying system.
Путинский режим, прикрываясь заботой о жителях Донбасса, развязал войну против Украины. Это захватническая война, которая преследует имперские цели – удушение украинского народа и передел сфер влияния в Восточной Европе. Мы выражаем свою солидарность украинскому рабочему классу и всем угнетенным в борьбе против российского империализма. Мы требуем немедленно прекратить эту войну и вернуть все войска домой. Путинский режим мечтает вернуть России статус крупной мировой державы, который был потерян с распадом Советского Союза. А крупные мировые державы – это капиталистические монстры, сражающиеся в различных военных союзах друг с другом за лакомые ресурсы и рынки. Войны, прокси-войны уже давно являются частью мировых отношений. Но сегодня Путин чувствует себя сильнее, чем за последние 20 лет. Страна за это время успела накопить 640 миллиардов долларов золотовалютных резервов и движется в сторону союза с Китаем. Успела поставить Европу в зависимости от российского газа, а внутри страны уже подавлена оппозиция. Пьянеющие россияне постоянно запугиваются новыми репрессиями. Нападая на Украину, российский империализм начинает силовой передел всей Восточной Европы, которая является зоной интересов западного империализма. Он давно имеет там войска и базы. Поэтому Путин планирует не только удушить украинский народ, но и хочет запугать тем самым все восточноевропейские страны, входящие в НАТО, показать им, кто в регионе настоящий хозяин. Эта военная политика Путина грозит втянуть в конфликт все больше стран и может перерасти в полномасштабную войну между разными империалистическими державами. Такой войны не было в Европе с конца Второй мировой. Русский империализм подсчитал, что сейчас настало время сделать решительный шаг к продвижению своих собственных интересов. Империализм США ослаблен, Европейский Союз борется с внутренним разделением, а Китай становится главной заботой США в перестройке мирового порядка. Но Путин нарушает право украинцев на самоопределение. Он считает Украину неотъемлемой частью России, подобно претензиям Си на Тайвань. Эта война не имеет ничего общего с защитой населения любой из стран, втянутых в конфликт. У НАТО не вызывает обычно никаких проблем сотрудничества с диктатурами, если им это, конечно, удобно. А путинский режим поддерживает самые правые партии в Европе, но сейчас ведет эту войну под знаменами антифашизма и защиты демократических прав. Война приведет к невероятным человеческим страданиям, будет оплачиваться из кошельков рабочего класса, приведет к экономическим проблемам, к огромному количеству беженцев и не решит ни одной из существующих проблем. и уж точно не приведет к снижению межимпериалистической напряженности. Но несмотря на то, что правящие элиты нас убеждают в обратном, война не отвечает интересам рабочего класса и мирного населения ни в одной из вовлеченных в конфликт стран. Важность того, что происходит сегодня в Украине, выходит далеко за ее пределы. Экономический кризис, волны реакционного национализма, возможно, миллионы беженцев создадут больше глобальных кризисов как раз в тот момент, когда нам кажется, что пандемия вступает в новую, как будто бы более управляемую фазу, и мы близимся к концу кризиса. За эту войну заплатит рабочий класс и угнетенные, но точно не правящие элиты. Первый пакет санкций против России ударил по кошелькам российских олигархов в абсолютно ничтожном масштабе. 500 богатейших людей России потеряли всего 32 миллиарда долларов, при том, что за пандемию их богатство выросло на 45% и достигло 640 миллиардов. Наполовину потерь они уже успели вернуть из-за некоторой стабилизации экономики и ее адаптации к новым санкциям против России. В это же время мы видим небывалые уровни инфляции и падения рубля, ежедневный рост цен на продукты первой необходимости, рост уровня безработицы, нищенские зарплаты, сокращение финансирования социального сектора, здравоохранения, образования, в угоду увеличения и без того раздутых военных бюджетов. Обстрелы населенных пунктов, убийства, ранения мирных жителей, тысячи травмированных войной детей, отправка солдат-срочников на войну и на смерть без топлива и еды. Женщины и дети, рабочие, которые живут 8 лет в зоне боевых действий. За это заплатим мы, трудящиеся. Именно мы будем расплачиваться за имперские амбиции путинского режима и НАТО. Особенно сильно война ударит по женщинам, которые первыми ощутят жесточайшие последствия экономического и социального кризисов. Ударит по трудящимся в Украине, России, Европе, США, Китае и по всему миру. Сегодня мы наблюдаем ужасающие кадры из Украины. Женщины, старики и дети, спящие на полу в метро, разрушенные жилые здания, танки и ракеты в населенных пунктах. Мы обвиняем путинский режим, неспособный решить социальные проблемы миллионов россиян, желающие забить голодные желудки масс патриотической идеей. Но то, что сработало захватом Крыма в 2014 году, вряд ли сработает сегодня с Украиной. Или даже одним Донбассом. Все, к чему приведет российская агрессия, к бедности, разрухе, смертям по обе стороны границ и ненависти между народами. Мы обвиняем страны НАТО, которые десятки лет расширяют военное присутствие на востоке Европы, что постоянно провоцирует российский режим на ответные меры давления. Вопрос защиты Украины, на который ссылается НАТО, в этом контексте служит лишь удобным пропагандистским объяснением для западных и украинских масс, чтобы скрыть имперскую сущность военных интересов блока. На протяжении многих недель мы ведем антивоенную пропаганду и организовываем людей на борьбу. Мы призываем и вас выступить на протестах 8 марта по всему миру и требовать прекращения войны в Украине, выступить за право украинцев решать свое будущее, включая право меньшинств на самоопределение, требовать возвращения российских войск в казармы в России и вывод всех войск НАТО из Восточной Европы. Мы должны быть убеждены в том, что ни одна из вовлеченных империалистических сил не может выступать в качестве миротворцев. Мы должны не питать иллюзий о дипломатии со стороны военных, а построить массовое, низовое, антивоенное империалистическое движение, связывающее рабочих, молодежь и женщин через границы. Мы должны выступить за интернациональный рабочий класс социалистической альтернативы, который будет действительно способен разрушить капитализм, приводящий к войнам, разрушениям, бедности и разрухе до самого основания.
Thank you so much. We are sending solidarity to all the innocent people that are caught in this petty crossfire of power-hungry politicians. Next up is Harita from Ireland, who will be talking about the shadow pandemic of violence against women and young girls that the ruling class is refusing to shine light upon. The UN estimates that 1 in 4 women experience physical or sexual violence during pregnancy. 603 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime. 80% of people who are trafficked are women and girls. 79% of the time for sexual exploitation. Black women and immigrant women suffer much extreme violence. Harita will further explain how women are being radicalized by these issues and are coming to the forefront of the struggle. We may have passed the dark ages and the era of backwardness, but in so many ways, capitalism has kept humanity trapped in our primitive needs and has slowed down our evolution. There is so much suffering, and we owe it to the future of this planet to continue to fight against the system and no longer fall trap to the ruling class propaganda that we are free. Herita will further explain how the LGBTQI plus struggles are linked to women's struggles and their world crisis on gender politics, and the importance of ongoing wave of radicalization and international solidarity. Welcome, Herita.
In Tullamore in Ireland, there is a canal walkway named after a pregnant woman who disappeared, likely as a result of men's violence against women in 1996. This year, around 4 p.m. on the 12th of January, a 23-year-old woman and primary school teacher named Aisling Murphy ran here just as thousands of women had before her. But Aisling, who was a beloved member of her community, was violently murdered in what has sparked a watershed moment in Ireland, where the heartbeat of grief and anger at gender-based violence has loudly surfaced in hundreds of vigils and solidarity protests organised in every town, city and running club to mourn her and the over 285 femicides since the 1990s in Ireland, North and South. This is a global femicide emergency of 137 women being killed by intimate partners or ex-partners every single day. That is one woman almost every 10 minutes, only increasing with the shadow pandemic of gender violence. The first 21 days of the 2020 lockdowns in the UK saw a doubling of intimate partner killings, whilst 2021 was the deadliest year for trans and non-binary people in the US. This is in the context of women, children and LGBTQIA plus people being forced to live with violent, abusive and unsupportive partners and family members due to increased financial insecurity resulting from completely inadequate investment into public housing the world over. It is no coincidence that these same women and girls have borne the brunt of the increased unpaid housework and childcare during COVID, whilst also being far more likely to be the most exploited essential workers in highly feminized sectors such as healthcare, education, hospitality and retail. This pandemic has exposed the system that we live under, capitalism, as not giving a damn about the lives, health and safety of the majority in its ruthless pursuit of profit at all ends. Not only perpetrating, but also relying on misogyny. For example, channeling toxic beauty standards that allow the global beauty industry to be worth $500 billion. Gender violence, the majority of which is intimate partner or family-based abuse, is at its base rooted in the ideology of the patriarchal family structure, in which the ownership and controlling of women's bodies is central, and in which capitalism has used to its benefit by tying working class and poor women into trillions of dollars worth of unpaid labour in the domestic sphere that helps to reproduce the workforce for capitalism, a workforce that creates the profits for the capitalist class. Gender violence is the most violent expression of this system. In the eyes of perpetrators, it seeks to make victims feel powerless and chained to silence. But whether it be the college students in the UK protesting spiking of drinks and recently horrifically by injection, or male school students in Carlow in Ireland wearing skirts and leggings in solidarity with female and LGBTQ plus students, protesting male teachers sexualizing their uniforms, to the hundreds of thousands of women internationally that joined the Chilean women in their feminist anthem, A Rapist in Your Path, the global feminist wave has shown that we are ready to emerge out from the shadows and onto the streets. The Chilean women consciously pointed to the police, the courts, the state and the president as being responsible for gender violence. Their calls understood that we don't need an establishment feminism of fighting for nothing more than a seat at the table. We need a socialist feminism, one that is of and for the majority, that understands that we are the class of people whose work allows society to function and the world to turn. The establishment media will try to tell us that March 8th is a day for husbands to get their wives flowers and cupcakes to appreciate their endless list of daily sacrifices as they carry out the work that is most unpaid and underpaid in the world. This year, we call out the system that would completely crumble without these sacrifices. A teenager striking last year on March 8th in Bolivia, where they're engaged in a bitter struggle against barbaric abortion legislation, poignantly remarked that it is not a day to party. But we do celebrate that every comfort and step forward that women and queer people enjoy today was won by collective struggle on International Women's Day, or International Working Women's Day as it was originally known, and every day of the year otherwise. From the 620-kilometre wall formed by hundreds of thousands of Indian women in Kerala in 2019, to the tens of thousands of Irish people who struck for abortion rights in 2017, to 100 years previous, where masses of Russian women sparked a revolution that would bring the world's first worker state that brought massive leap forwards for women and LGBTQ+ people. These examples from history show that we can fight and win a world where ni una menos is a reality, where not one more woman or gender non-conforming person is lost to a system of macho violence. Many people here would remember the horrific 2015 Stanford rape case against a former student, Brock Turner, who assaulted an unconscious 23-year-old woman in the US. I want to end in the same way the survivor did in her powerful victim statement, because I think that she brings out the optimism we need on March 8th this year and every year until we tear down the mighty walls of capitalism and oppression. She said, "I hope that by speaking today, you absorbed a small amount of light and a big, big knowing that you are important, unquestionably. You are untouchable, you are beautiful, you are to be valued, respected, undeniably, every minute of every day. You are powerful and nobody can take that away from you. To girls everywhere, I am with you. Thank you."
Thank you so much, Herita. Now don't forget to check out the ISA and Rosa International Socialist Feminist websites, where you will find unbiased news from a socialist perspective and keep up with worldwide struggles. Links will be in the description below. This day is to remind us of the ever-growing need for coordinated international struggles. Next up is Bruna from Brazil. She will be speaking in Portuguese. She will be talking about working class women in Brazil and the impact of the pandemic on living conditions. In 2021, President Bolsonaro, in a spectacular display of disdain against women's dignity, blocked the distribution of free tampons and pads to women in Brazil, which was expected to reach about 5.4 million women, disadvantaged women and girls. Bolsonaro claimed that it is against public interest to distribute sanitary towels to women. From a young age, I have always found it odd, very odd and incredibly disturbing that women are made to pay for their own reproductive health plus raising humanity. Reproductive health should be 100% free, regardless of age, economic status, or race. Capitalism focuses a lot on making a penny out of everything, that it privatizes and commodifies even essential services like these and childcare, precisely because it is a sensible, humane act that does not bring in money. It is barbaric. Bruna will also touch on the violence of poverty on women in Brazil. Bruna, take it away.
Olá a todas que participam desse ato. Eu sou a Bruna, falo de São Paulo, Brasil. Sou mãe, professora de ciências e militante da ASE. Nos últimos anos temos visto a condição de vida piorar. A pandemia intensificou as desigualdades e violência sofrida pelas mulheres trabalhadoras nesse sistema. O aumento do preço dos alimentos, do gás de cozinha, da gasolina, da energia elétrica, fizeram com que essas trabalhadoras tivessem que escolher entre comer e usar energia elétrica. Isso acontece no mesmo momento em que os bilionários mais lucram. Aqui, com o governo Bolsonaro, houveram cortes milionários de verba nas áreas da saúde e educação pública durante o período da pandemia. Nesse cenário, as mulheres trabalhadoras seguem sendo as mais atingidas, principalmente mulheres negras. Seja por cuidar dos seus doentes, por se contaminarem através do trabalho doméstico, no transporte público lotado, pelo desemprego e pela sobrecarga de tarefas. No Brasil, cerca de 80% das trabalhadoras da educação são mulheres. Não à toa o setor da educação segue sofrendo desvalorização. A cada ano, a educação pública tem grande redução do seu orçamento, colocando em risco o emprego de milhares, principalmente no ensino infantil, onde a maioria das trabalhadoras são terceirizadas. Durante o período de isolamento social, as escolas foram fechadas sem nenhum planejamento, afetando a alimentação dos alunos, desconsiderando a falta de acesso a equipamentos eletrônicos para acompanharem as aulas. Isso fez com que os alunos de escolas públicas não conseguissem acompanhar as aulas, enquanto os alunos do ensino privado continuaram tendo acesso à educação. Cerca de 244 mil crianças e adolescentes entre 6 e 14 anos estavam fora da escola no segundo trimestre de 2021. O número representa um aumento de 171% se comparado a 2019. A maioria das crianças e adolescentes fora da escola são meninas pobres, negras e indígenas, que abandonaram os estudos para cuidar de casa e da família. Com o fechamento das escolas, muitas trabalhadoras terceirizadas da cozinha, limpeza, professoras, tiveram seus salários atrasados ou deixaram seus trabalhos para cuidar dos filhos e parentes adoecidos. As que se mantiveram empregadas sofreram com a sobrecarga de trabalho. O modo de trabalho à distância, para essas educadoras, também significou uma sobrecarga de tarefas, uma vez que não é de fato acessível. Além disso, a pressão que ocorreu para que tivesse um retorno das aulas presenciais, sem condições mínimas de segurança sanitária, levou a categoria de professores da educação pública municipal a entrarem em greve para que, pelo menos, tivessem prioridade na vacinação contra o novo vírus. Essa luta arrancou vitórias em São Paulo e foi exemplo que impulsionou a luta das trabalhadoras da saúde, que tentaram organizar paralisações por melhores condições sanitárias e de trabalho. Porém, foram coagidos pela justiça que proibiu a greve dessa categoria. Mesmo assim, as assembleias realizadas bateram recordes e gerou uma pressão que trouxe pequenos ganhos, como a contratação de mais de 1.500 novos funcionários na capital. Precisamos de um feminismo socialista, antirracista, que coloque no centro as necessidades das mulheres da classe trabalhadora pelo fim desse sistema podre, que diante de uma das mais graves pandemias da história, nos oprime e nos explora todos os dias.
Thank you so much for your insights, Bruna. I think it's clear these world leaders are incapable of taking humanity forward. They are only obsessed with money and power. Abortion rights in particular are in the firing line of attacks against women in the two dominant and competing imperialist powers, USA and China. And across the whole world, really. Having the right to decide what should happen to your own body is a fundamental human right that is being attacked through lack of access to adequate healthcare and repressive laws from right-wing governments. At the same time, years of grassroots struggle and mass pressure have also snatched victories in some countries, especially in Latin America, shown by Colombia's Constitutional Court voting in favor of decriminalizing abortion in the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. Next up is Grace from the USA, who will be talking about the abortion ban in Texas and threats in other states. Also linking the struggle for bodily autonomy to the struggle against capitalism and its guardians, including all-trend pro-corporate, pro-democrat feminism. Grace will also emphasize on the need for international, organized, mass independent struggles. Welcome, Grace. You may have the floor.
Hi everybody, my name is Grace. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, the US section of the ISA, and I live in Dallas, Texas. Women here in Texas have been living under the shadow of Senate Bill 8 for 6 months now. This bill criminalizes virtually all abortions, starting at 5 to 6 weeks in a pregnancy, before many would even know that they're pregnant. Rather than being enforced by the state, the ban works by allowing private citizens to sue providers, patients, or anybody who aids and abets an abortion for a fine of up to $10,000, so putting enforcement directly in the hands of the sexist pro-life right wing. There are no exceptions for pregnancies that are the result of rape or incest, and this has been called the most brutally restrictive abortion law in U.S. history since the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision ensured the right to abortion in 1973. Abortions have dropped by 60% in the state of Texas, as thousands have fled the state to access care elsewhere, which has been very costly for working-class women, or have been forced to continue a pregnancy against their will. While this shameful crackdown dealt an unprecedented blow to reproductive rights, it's just one of over 1,300 laws passed in states across the country that have chipped away at abortion access for working-class women in particular. This spring, the majority conservative U.S. Supreme Court will decide on a case that could deal an even deadlier blow to abortion rights in the U.S. This is the Dobbs case, which could result in allowing bans on abortions after just 15 weeks. This could mean that Roe v. Wade, the defining victory of the radical mass women's movement of the 1960s and 70s, could be virtually nullified by the time of its 50-year anniversary in 2023, unless there is a massive fight back to stop it. A nationwide day of action in protest of SB 8 drew tens of thousands of people on October 2nd of 2021, but a widespread fight back to defend abortion rights has not yet materialized. Much of the responsibility for this lies with the traditional women's organizations, overwhelmingly NGOs and nonprofits, closely aligned with the Democratic Party's approach. Every election cycle, the Democrats campaign on being the pro-choice party who are going to defend Roe v. Wade. But now that the Democrats are in power at the federal level, they have done nothing whatsoever to fight the attacks from either Republican states or the Supreme Court. As the Dobbs decision draws closer, it's critical that we take inspiration from struggles internationally and from history to build a mass movement to defend and extend reproductive rights. Senate Bill 8 went into effect in September just as a struggle for abortion rights reached a milestone victory in Mexico when the criminalization of abortion was declared unconstitutional. And this victory would not have been possible on the basis of relying on the courts themselves or the political establishment. It took years of building organizations, of a cross-border Green Tide movement, and mass mobilizations to apply pressure from below. And the same will be necessary in the US and everywhere. The same was true of the historic victory in Argentina at the start of 2021. And if there's anything that we've learned in recent years, it's that movements in one country or region can spread like wildfire. And this is especially true when there's a victory that shows the path forward for fighting forms of sexist oppression that women face all over the world. The movement to repeal the Eighth in Ireland, which went up against the political power of the Catholic Church and won a historic victory for bodily autonomy, is crucial to draw lessons from here in the US, where the pro-life movement is heavily influenced by the religious right and wields a great deal of institutional power. In the US, ever since the ground-shaking developments of the Women's March and the Me Too movements in 2017 and 2018, the women's movement has been on the defensive, even as the pandemic has severely worsened the crisis facing women. But there are signs of hope and new developments among young people and in the labor movement. Since schools have gone back in person, high school and college campuses have been rocked by a wave of demonstrations and walkouts fighting against sexual harassment and assault. Women have played an outsized role in the revival of the labor movement, from the Red for Ed teacher strikes to a 9-month-long nurses' strike in Worcester, Massachusetts last year, which began on International Women's Day 2021. Even in the historically conservative building trades, during the Washington Carpenter strike, a rank-and-file group pushed for union leadership to act on sexual harassment and assault in construction sites. These are the forces that are showing that they're ready to fight, and it's workers and youth that are going to be central to leading the new women's struggle that we need. It's also crucial for us to recognize that every fight that we take up against the capitalist ruling class puts our movement on better footing to fight for a program of liberation for workers and the oppressed. It will be critical to unite with the labor movement, with Black Lives Matter, and the struggles for the whole of the working class to harness the full weight that working people have in capitalist society. International Women's Day was born out of strikes, marches, and revolutionary struggle, and it will take nothing less than this to fight attacks on bodily autonomy, and we must set our sights on fighting for a future where gender violence, control of women's bodies, and all forms of capitalist oppression are things of the past.
Thank you so much, Grace. Our next speaker is Andrea from Taiwan. For safety reasons, due to ongoing state repression in China and attacks on human rights, she will have her mask on. She's going to be discussing the wave of feminism in China and ongoing restrictions on abortion rights and reactionary ideologies that threaten to reassert traditional family structures, attack LGBTQI+ rights, and reverse the little gains women have made over the years. The year 2018 to 2019 saw massive strikes in China against attacks on human rights by the CCP. Much as the movement achieved a tradition of resistance, it did not manage to secure real concessions. The working class is the missing ingredient for more organized, centralized, politically clear struggle on a socialist program. Welcome, Andrea.
The Chinese dictatorship is trying to eradicate feminism. There is a severe crackdown against the feminist idea in the web pages. The so-called Communist Party government uses extreme nationalism in the repression. It says feminism is anti-China and a part of a US plan to create problems in China. LGBTQ people are also under attack. Chinese officials say homosexuality is a Western creation. The American TV sitcom Friends, which is very big in China, has been censored. For example, one of the main characters has a child whose mother is a lesbian, but not in the Chinese version. LGBTQ people cannot be shown on TV. In February, China was hit by the biggest political scandal since the start of the pandemic in 2020. This is the shocking case of a woman who was chained by the neck and kept in a freezing dirty shack in Feng County, East China. She gave birth to 8 children and was put in chains because she was mentally ill. On 1st February, a TikTok video of the chained-up woman was viewed over 3 billion times before being blocked by censors. For weeks, this case completely overshadowed the Beijing Olympics, with 10 times more online posts about the chained-up woman than Olympics. Groups of women tried to go to rescue the victim. They were stopped by police and some were arrested. This case provoked mass anger against the government's attempt to cover up the truth. The terrifying truth is trafficking of women and girls in China. They are kidnapped and sold to men to be their wives, to be raped and made to have babies. The chained-up woman had 8 children, which is illegal in China. This proves the collision of the police and local government. In many local areas, the Communist Party, the police, the court are complicit in this illegal trade in women. Under Chinese law, you get 10 years in prison for trafficking a panda, but only 3 years for trafficking a woman. There are 35 million more men than women. For 36 years, the Communist Party imposed a very hard control over women's reproductive rights, their one-child policy. During this time, boys were preferred over girls due to the pressure of sexist patriarchal structures and attitudes. It is also linked to the brutal restoration of capitalism in China. Welfare was destroyed by privatization and the lack of funding. The capitalist economy gave baby boys a higher status. Men get better jobs and property entitlements. 7 million sex-selective abortions were carried out. Female fetuses were aborted. This economic and sexist pressure to have male babies led to the population crisis. The Communist Party today is a right-wing capitalist dictatorship which wants to control women's body, but now to pressure them to have more babies. It is attacking abortion rights to create more red tape, to limit abortions on non-medical grounds. It wants to reinforce the traditional family led by masculine men. This is a tool of social and political control. The new three-child policy was launched by Xi Jinping in 2021 to promote more babies. But the three-child policy weakens the status of women in the labor market. Bosses are even more unwilling to employ women because they don't want to pay for maternity leave and child care. The divorce law of 2020 has led to more court rulings refusing divorce. Divorce cases fell by more than half last year. China in the 1950s was much poorer than today, but it introduced a revolutionary divorce law that increased equality between men and women. Today's dictatorship serves capitalism. It reinforces many of the worst forms of women's oppression. The mass anger over trafficking in Feng County shows the real mood in Chinese society against enslavement and oppression of women. Xi Jinping wants to destroy feminism, but that is like turning back the ocean. It will fail. I'm Taiwanese. ISA in Taiwan express our full solidarity with the feminists in China against repression. We fight for socialist feminism to link with workers' struggles and terminate the evil sexist capitalist system.
The woman free from the man, both free from capital. These are the words of the Italian communist Camilla Rivera. One might say in brief, this is the Marxist position on the women's question. Rosa International Socialist Feminist Organization was named after the revolutionary socialist Rosa Luxemburg and the civil rights activist Rosa Parks. Rosa is a wide network of socialist feminist organizations around the world aiming to unite working class women around the world on a clear program. Next up is Anya from Rosa International. Anya is going to emphasize the need for a socialist feminist international organization of women in the wider working class. Women's struggles are tied to workers' struggles and the struggle against the system.
Les dernières semaines, l'Alternative Socialiste Internationale et Rosa Féministe Socialiste Internationale ont mené des campagnes de mobilisation pour des actions, des manifestations et des grèves le 8 mars, Journée internationale des femmes. Nous voulions y faire entendre notre rage sur la violence faite aux femmes, le harcèlement, les féminicides. Notre rage sur la violence économique et sociale que nous subissons avec nos salaires et revenus déjà bas qui ne suivent pas l'augmentation rapide du coût de la vie. Et ça, pendant que dans les secteurs où nous sommes prédominants, on a tout donné, dans les soins de santé, dans les services sociaux, dans l'enseignement, pour assurer que la société tourne pendant la pandémie. Notre rage sur la violence d'État qui réprime brutalement nos mouvements et qui attaque notre droit fondamental de décider sur nos propres corps, le droit à l'avortement. Mais le 24 février, la population en Ukraine s'est réveillée tôt le matin sur des sons de guerre. Toutes les choses contre lesquelles nous nous battons de plus en plus dans les dernières 10 années sont multipliées dans une situation de guerre et d'occupation. Nous allons alors manifester ce 8 mars pour la paix, comme les organisations des femmes travailleuses socialistes l'ont fait pendant la Première Guerre mondiale. Nous demandons le retrait des troupes russes de l'Ukraine, en solidarité avec les femmes et la population de l'Ukraine, pris en otage dans un jeu géopolitique des grandes puissances impérialistes. Pour une Ukraine indépendante et libre, et pour le droit à l'autodétermination des minorités opprimées. La guerre froide entre les États-Unis et la Chine a donné naissance à son premier guerre chaude. Et il y a toute une série de régions dans le monde qui sont devenues des poudrières, n'attendant qu'une étincelle. Et en Ukraine, les étincelles ne venaient pas que de la Russie. Le président des États-Unis, Biden, et ses alliés occidentaux ont une responsabilité clé dans le surenchère militaire, faite pour servir leurs propres intérêts, avec le coup qui tombe sur la tête de la population en Ukraine. Nous demandons donc aussi le retrait des troupes de l'OTAN de la région. Les femmes n'ont leur place dans aucun de ces camps. Certainement pas dans le camp de Poutine, misogyniste notoire, autocrate, connu pour la répression de toute expression d'opposition, avec le mouvement femmes durement attaqué. Tout notre soutien pour la construction d'un mouvement anti-guerre qui monte la pression pour le retrait des troupes russes de l'Ukraine. Pas dans le camp de la Chine, qui imposait dans le passé des avortements aux femmes avec leur politique d'un enfant, et qui aujourd'hui rend l'avortement presque illégal. Malgré les méthodes dictatoriales utilisées par le régime chinois, des millions de femmes chinoises courageuses ont participé dans des protestations en ligne ces dernières années dans leur MeToo. Notre camp est avec elles. Aux États-Unis, le droit à l'avortement est sous attaque, et malgré le fait que les démocrates sont au pouvoir, aucun réel contre-attaque est lancé. Ça s'ajoute aux autres promesses électorales brisées par Biden. Les jeunes femmes aux États-Unis vont devoir construire leur propre mouvement pour défendre et restaurer le droit à l'avortement, cherchant des alliés dans le mouvement ouvrier. Notre camp est là. Notre camp est avec les femmes et les autres couches opprimées. Notre camp est avec les jeunes et les travailleurs du monde qui se battent contre toute exploitation et oppression. Rosa, socialiste féministe internationale, et l'alternative socialiste internationale défendent un féminisme socialiste. Un féminisme qui se bat pour les droits des femmes, mais aussi pour les besoins de cette majorité de femmes travailleuses et pauvres qui sont niées par les féministes néolibérales. Nous nous battons contre toute forme d'oppression et de discrimination, et contre l'exploitation des travailleurs partout dans le monde, des choses qui sont intimement liées dans le système entièrement basé sur l'inégalité qui est le capitalisme. Pour arriver à une société où la violence faite aux femmes et aux personnes LGBTQI n'est plus de l'actualité, juste comme la destruction écologique. Pour une société où des secteurs essentiels pour le bien-être de tous, comme la santé et l'enseignement, et tellement d'autres, reçoivent les moyens nécessaires pour offrir des services de qualité accessibles à tous, avec des bonnes conditions pour le personnel. Une société où le phénomène de la travailleuse et du travailleur pauvre est devenu une histoire horrible du passé, juste comme la guerre. Pour arriver à une telle société, il faut se débarrasser du contrôle des grands capitalistes, une petite minorité parasitique sur nos vies et la vie sur la planète. Nous nous battons contre chaque attaque aux droits et conditions des femmes. Nous nous battons pour chaque avancée qu'on peut arracher, chaque droit, chaque avancée dans nos conditions de vie. Nous allons nous battre contre la guerre. Venez nous rejoindre dans nos actions et débats le 8 mars. Menez cette lutte avec nous. Mais nous sommes convaincus qu'il faut se battre pour une alternative socialiste, qu'il n'y a pas de capitalisme sans oppression et d'exploitation, sans guerre. Nous voulons mener cette discussion avec vous et trouver une issue de la crise totale qui se déferle de plus en plus sur tous les niveaux.
Workers of the world, unite! Anya is making some really great points on these issues and the way forward. For women to really be free, we need to begin with demands such as socializing housework, universal childcare, shorter working hours, and much, much more. In order to do this, we need to nationalize the main levers of the economy and place them in the hands of the working class to eliminate the profit motive. There has been a growing understanding amongst activists that reforming the system is an impossibility. The struggle for socialism is a struggle for a society where class divisions are abolished, the very soil in which women's oppression was established. Once we change the material conditions, the very ideas that inspire sexist, racist, and cultural ideas that influence society will begin to fade, and a socialist society will decide on their ruling ideas and organize society accordingly. Socialist feminism belongs to the working class as a whole. Thank you so much to the speakers, and thanks to you for tuning in on this auspicious occasion of the workers' movement. Visit Rosa's website to read our International Women's Day statement. Links will be posted in the description below. Also visit ISA website for working class news and analysis. If you're in South Africa, visit www.socialist.org.za for working class analysis. Let's take on the lessons and analysis given by our speakers and engage in challenging the system everywhere. The rightful anger of millions of people around the world needs to be channeled into an organized international union on a socialist program. Join a community organization, a student organization, or a workers' organization and come fight with us on March 8th and the times to come. Wherever you are, organize and rebel. Here's to a socialist future. Amandla!